Greetings. Welcome to our panel on heritage tourism and marketing. I'm Charles Davis, the Dean of Grady College. You saw me very recently in the big room, and I'm delighted to introduce my fellow panelists. I have asked them to speak in turn on their subjects of expertise, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. We'll make sure that we have plenty of time to hear your questions as well. I'm going to introduce them in order of their appearance on the panel. Cari, Goetcheus, did I butcher that name? I've never said your last name, Cari, Goetcheus. That's good. Is with the UGA College of Environment and Design in the Graduate Historic Preservation Program. Cari's a licensed landscape architect trained in historic preservation and is going to talk to us about the ways in which they're using drones in that field. And we're delighted that you're here, Cari. Tommy Jordan is with the Georgia Center for Geospatial Research. Dr. Jordan's an ASPRS certified I don't even know how to say that, Tommy, photogrammetrist, and the former associate director of the UGA Center for Geospatial Research. He's been flying drones since early 2014 for natural resource and cultural heritage applications, with an emphasis on developing 3D point cloud models of landscapes and cultural features. And I can't wait to find out what the heck that is. We'll get the time. And finally, to my immediate left, Fabio Musio, the owner of 100 Digital Creativity, an agency which specializes in providing avant-garde aerial, ground, and underwater media with special emphasis on travel and economic development clients. Born and raised in Turin, Italy, Fabio has a passion to learn, analyze, and adopt new technologies and tools to enhance his clients' brands with cutting-edge imagery. Fabio had a wonderful phone conversation this week, and to say it was wide-ranging was a vast understatement. Among other things, Fabio very recently shot a convention that you were talking about? With a Segway and a pole and a camera, which I'm going to ask him to elaborate on in just a minute.
Fake drone.
Fake drone. So we'll start with you, Cari, if you want to take it away. It is perfectly all right if you stand up. Can we get out of your way? Okay.
No, it should be, I guess if you can hit the, thank you.
Just keep shooting.
And there's that moment in which
Technology, we love it, right? Okay, we'll get past that. So, first thing I need to do is just kind of get you guys all on the same baseline of what in the world is heritage and cultural heritage and the kind of stuff that I work with. So, these are just some images of heritage. When we think of heritage or historic preservation, typically we think of buildings, but it's actually a lot more than that. So it is things like covered bridges, churches, it's actually even boats, airplanes, statuary, fountains, courthouses, infrastructure, dams, bridges, things like that, modern architecture, and of course we've got fun, entertaining things, Lucy the elephant. Battlefields, cemeteries, cities, statuary again, mile markers. They can even be natural resources that have cultural meaning attached to them. It can be places where we rethink of what society does and doesn't include. It is prehistoric villages, it is current villages and towns, historic districts. It's designed gardens, it is very large estate gardens, battlefields and farmsteads, vernacular areas. It's also designed landscapes like this where you would think normally this is a natural resource, but that roadway was designed in a very specific way for a visitor's experience. So to me, that is what I call a cultural landscape. So it's not just structures. So that's the world that I live in and the kinds of things that I like to look at. So the kinds of things that we do in the world of heritage and cultural heritage is actually pretty similar to a lot of other industries. We basically need to identify those resources, we need to inventory them, so that we know what's actually there. So we look for architectural styles and patterns, we look for land use patterns. Because cultural landscapes deal with ecology and culture, we have to understand ecosystems, how vegetation changes over time. What's historic roadways, historic patterns? We then try to document what that is. So we figure out what its strengths are and what the weaknesses are. So if we have to analyze it and repair it, we know where things stand. Then, of course, there's always the monitoring for change thing. We can actually monitor for very specific things. We have, I'll call it widgets, little technical doohickeys that we can put into cracks that actually will let us know if it has increased by 1 millimeter or less than 1 millimeter. So we want to monitor that kind of stuff. We also want to monitor things from a much larger scale. So climate change and sea level rise. A lot of our historic cities and towns are along waterways, whether it's rivers or it's oceans. So what does sea level rise do to our historic resources? There's been cases where people will move lighthouses in by a mile. After a while, you don't actually have that context anymore of like that lighthouse actually being near the water. So we do have to think about these things. There's also impact on materials. As things start to get submerged by water, the salts in the water will draw out, and so the actual materials, whether it's stone or brick, will get much less structurally capable, and it won't be able to stand in a certain way. So we have to understand how those changes might impact what the historic resources are. And then, of course, disaster response. Other than, of course, what we've seen awfully with Hurricane Harvey and Irma, and recognizing where the problems are, there's also an opportunity to say, okay, this house may not be livable at the moment, but you know what, it's a really old house, it's a really historic house. Does it really have to be demolished? Is there something we can do to actually protect and conserve this thing? So this is kind of the range of tasks that we do in general for heritage resources. So some of the challenges we have from that is, how do we access these things? Sometimes these architectural resources are really, really tall and the scaffolding only goes so far. And if it has very intricate details near the top of it, how do we actually document that very easily or very well? The size, when I deal with cultural landscapes, I can deal with things that are down to a quarter-acre residential garden, but I can also deal with 10,000-acre ranches out west. You might know from historic maps where things are located, but can you actually access all of that stuff? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Also time, like any consultant, time is money. If we only have a limited number of days to go on a site, if we have a little bit of a more efficient way of getting around, it can help us a lot. And then in historic preservation, I always kind of joke and say it's weird to have the terms historic preservation and technology in the same sentence, because you normally think, oh, we just like things really old and the way they were, but how can we actually use these technologies to assist us with the stuff that we've always done? So how can we, preservationists we're not fuddy-duddies, we do like technology, we're trying to make sure that all the students know any technologies you see out there can absolutely be applied to heritage conservation and historic preservation. So I'm going to give you basically 2 case studies. This first one is more of an architectural case study. And I'm actually going to give credit because I actually just learned about this at a conference last May and was so impressed I basically begged them to let me have some of the footage. So this is the Soldier and Sailors Memorial Monument in New York. It is a it's a memorial for Union sailors and soldiers of the Civil War. It was first conceptualized in the 1860s, but didn't actually finally get built until the 1900s. This work was done by 2 different groups, Vertical Access and Kristen Olson. Vertical Access is actually a firm out of New York that totally focuses on documentation and inventory of heritage resources, but using all the latest technologies you can possibly imagine to assist that. Lyra is a structural engineering firm. Essentially, there's some big problems with this building, and so they wanted to figure out how can we make this function and be stable in the future. So they basically needed to have a drone to get up into the higher levels. It was covered by scaffolding, but they really couldn't reach the upper levels. So they wanted to, of course, see this really great bas relief. They wanted to see how the joints worked, if there was any mortar failure, etc. But they also knew that there was these great mosaics up top, and that there was an area even higher that wasn't publicly visually accessible, but they still needed to know how the structure would work. So they went through this very small oculus and looked into kind of the background to see what was what. And if you look here, the pipes essentially are from about the 1930s. Some of the debris that's in there is from the 1930s. I'm not sure how many people have actually seen inside this place in a very long time. Just looking back down through to the base. And so what they were trying to do was really look at structural capability. So they were looking for cracks. They were looking for where repairs were. This place has a long, long history of leaky roofs, of cement falling off, mosaic tiles falling off, large marble slabs falling off for literally the past 100 years. And they've been trying to do fundraising, but it's going to cost $5.5 million to do it properly. And so they wanted to look at things like these structural cracks, and you can start to see a few repairs that are occurring there too, but how they cut through stone. So that's just kind of one example of the way that we can use drones to access places that we can't access in an easy other way. The other case study I wanted to talk about was something that Tommy and I worked on together, and he'll build off of what I have here. Essentially, the National Park Service has a center called the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, because they've known that technology can help the preservation world for quite some time now. So we got a grant for about $40,000 in 2014, and we wanted to basically ask questions that deal with cost, accessibility, and usefulness. So cost, not everybody has money to buy fancy equipment. So we said, how much low-cost feeware and how much freeware is out there? So that was kind of the baseline look at it. Another was, how many skills do you need to be able to use this? We're not exactly all GIS experts. Can we actually use this technology and become decent at it? And then even from that, how can we capture data, and is the data good enough? Can it be accurate enough? So we wanted to test a whole bunch of different technologies. And we wanted to do this at specifically two very different places that have similar kinds of histories. So we looked at one place in Virginia and one place in Savannah, Georgia. They both have colonial histories, literally 300-year histories, agriculture. They basically both were early plantations. Tobacco in Virginia, cotton and rice in Savannah. 2,000 acres, 1,000 acres. This one happens to be on the upper Potomac River. This is just outside of Savannah. The Lee family, you may have heard of Robert E. Lee. Anyway, the Lee family in Virginia, very long-term family in Virginia. Same thing, Noble Jones. This is one of the first families in Georgia. So it was very important to get different physiographic places to see how the technologies would or wouldn't work. So I'm not going to go through all these, but we were looking at drones, but we were looking at a bunch of technology, because I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's old-fashioned technology, and even today old-fashioned is about 8 years ago, right? So we're using different kinds of cameras. We're using different modeling software. We're using drones, everything you can possibly think of, and Tommy will get a little bit more into that. So these are just kind of the toys that we were at that time. What we did is we looked at the sites, we tried to identify where we knew historic resources were, and then we basically captured them in several different ways to see how they would reveal themselves, shall we say. So I'm going to show you a lovely video that Tommy put together called Stratford Hall, a Drone's Eye View. And I'll just describe a couple things and point out a couple things here. So, main building here built in about 1715, 1720. You can see there's actually 4 buildings in a geometric shape here. This is a very classic pattern and way of building a site. So this is intact, hugely intact. The thing that I like about the visual of being a little higher up is you can see where visitor patterns are, where pathways are. So you might have to deal with erosion control or putting hardscape down. Some of these barns you can actually see additions in them. You can start to look at condition assessment with some of these things. You can see the framework. The Potomac River is basically back there. In the 1930s, they literally cut a swath out of the forest so they could have a vista to the Potomac. The 1930s recreated a garden. The 1960s recreated garden. The 1930s one was done same time Williamsburg was happening. In fact, the same architects and landscape architects were working on this property. The thing that I also like about the drone technology is there is opportunities for archaeological remnants just by how vegetation differs a little bit in coloration. You can see those kinds of things as well. And so kind of like little rings may indicate subsurface remnants. There's an area, it goes down to the Potomac River. There's an area where there's a mill and a mill pond, so you can actually see the dam of the mill pond there. I told you that cultural landscapes deal with ecology as well as culture. So we have to think about the shoreline erosion here, the numerous water breaks, breakwaters that we can see here. You can certainly talk about vegetation this way too, whether it's evergreen vegetation or it's deciduous vegetation. We'll look at these things a little bit more later, but these are limestone cliffs. There's only 4 places in the world that has that kind of geologic stratigraphy, essentially. You can find shark's teeth, you can find whale carcasses, all kinds of things from ancient times at this place. So to be able to look at the valleys and see it really from a very different perspective is really important. So we can start to take frames and monitor things and look at things in a different way. Just realized the audio's not going. He has a lovely background guitar going on.
You can hear it if you imagine it.
It was on a little earlier. There's the mill with the raceway, and there is the wheel there. So you could actually monitor change over time there. We've done some ground level information there where you can really just take photographs and put it into a fairly free software or inexpensive software. You could literally look at the algae on the roof and compare it over time if you went back at certain cycles, essentially. So then, I know this is a summit about drones. One moment, please. Just have 4 more slides. But I like to, like I said, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we don't just use drone technology. We take still images off of it. We use LiDAR. That's what this is. Essentially, you take aerial, it's like a new version of an aerial photograph. That the warmer colors are higher elevations, the cooler colors are lower elevations. You initially get it and the vegetation is on. There's certain software we can use. We can turn off the vegetation. So it's what's called bare earth. And if you look right here, this is actually Wormslow. This is a Civil War earthworks that currently is totally under forest cover. So you can actually, it can help you understand where things are, and you can start to measure and document things in that way as well. You can merge the aerial LiDAR with the terrestrial LiDAR. You bring it down to a 3D model, look around it. And then Tommy's a whiz with all this. He's letting me steal his thunder. He's very nice. You can actually take then ground-based photographs and incorporate it also into this kind of thing. And then finally, this literally is, we took a drone, we went up in the air. This is a tabby forge ruin from the early to late 1700s. And it literally extract the photos, put it into a fairly inexpensive software package, take pictures, a number of pictures around, or the drone pictures, put it in this structure from motion software, and you can make 3D models. So you don't have to be a GIS expert, you don't have to be a 3D gamer expert. There are different softwares that allow you to do different things. So that's a very quick take on how we use drones and technology with heritage.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Tommy.
All right, I'll take that. I'll talk from over on this side.
Okay, great.
That could be my first slide, maybe? It's not. Oh, there's mine. Let's see. So, Cari and I have worked together over a number of years on projects on cultural history documentation. By background, I am a photogrammetrist.
There you go.
And the word that speaker a little while ago mentioned, he mentioned very quickly, is photogrammetry. And what that means is using photographs and making measurements from them. In cultural history documentation, what is really useful is, any of y'all who, in the middle of a sentence, I'm going to stop and change sentences. Anybody who's ever done any field work, one of the things you know is your time in the field is very limited. And number two, you always forget to do something that you really meant to do. If you can take good photographs and you can make measurements from those photographs, you can go back and bring your data up to date that you forgot to do without actually going and spending a week to go back down to the field and taking new images or remembering to measure how big was that window. And so my focus is, I've been a tourist before. I don't do anything about tourist documentation except for just taking pretty pictures like all of you all do. But what I like to do is use the drone and other technologies to be able to document three-dimensionally, document structures and landscapes and features, geology, whatever, marshes, whatever it is, in 3D that you can actually make measurements from. So, let's see, the goals for the project that we were talking about are to figure out exactly which of the technologies worked and to kind of do a cost-benefit analysis with using different types of technologies and different methods for creating measurements. How easy was it to use? How readily can you use it? What's the cost for it? And then we did the two sites that Cari was talking about in the Stratford Hall in Virginia and Wormslow in Georgia. And we used, this is a lot of stuff, but we used GIS data, aerial photographs, we used terrestrial laser scanning, a couple different kinds of drones and cameras. We had a good set of ground control, which is our reference points, which are really important to use in GPS, but we also used a 50-foot tape measure to, and a compass, because those are, what we might have in the field. And we had several different kinds of software that we used. This is our field site. I think Cari showed that similar slide to it. It shows where the two sites are. Stratford is what I'm going to talk about right now. Stratford Hall. We had two sites that you saw from that drone video that Cari showed. The Great House here and this field, and then the grist mill are there. And the first thing I want to talk about is the grist mill. Now, the grist mill, okay, so if you look at that aerial photograph, what you see is that it's completely covered with trees. And I don't know about you, but I'm chicken to fly my drone in the trees, especially the Phantom 2 Vision Plus, which didn't have any obstacle avoidance, and it wasn't as good as the newer drones, but it's the one that we had at the time. So what we wanted to do was compare different technologies. So on the left, you see a handheld picture of this grist mill, and on the right is also the handheld picture, but it shows the laser scanner. Now, this laser scanner is about an $85,000 instrument, and we had to hire a consultant for $2,500 a day to come and use it. So there's a real cost. Now, on the left, both of these images are the beautiful images that were actually, these are point clouds, so each one of these colored dots or colors represents a discrete location in X, Y, and Z space. So, and the color is from the camera, so you can actually go into this thing and measure how wide that door is or how tall this brickwork is or anything like that. And so it's really, it's so accurate. It's like millimeter level accuracy. It's amazing, actually. So, but what can we do with a $400 camera and a $57 piece of software? Well, we can do the same thing, frankly. And that's what that is on the left. That's the point cloud. Same quality, actually I think it's better quality than the one we just looked at, but with a $400 Sony camera that you know, is autofocus and yada, 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 super easy to use, processed with this piece of software called PhotoScan, which is a piece of, it's not expensive and it's really quite useful. But you have lots of details there. We have the laser scan on the left and we have the handheld photo point cloud on the right. And it could be argued that the one on the right looks better. It's got some weird artifacts up on the top from the sky, but that can be edited out. There's another comparison of the grist wheel, or whatever the wheel is called. So how good is it really? Well, if you measure, here's where our tape measure came into play, right in here. We measured the dimensions of the building, and then scaling it with between the terrestrial laser scan, which I think is truth, and the tape measure, which is also truth. Put it all into two versions of truth. You put it all together, and what you end up with is, if you compare with this PC, that means the point cloud, that's the one I made analytically, the difference is 1/100 of a foot or 3/100 of a foot, you know, in 100ths of a foot in length and in 3/100 of a foot in width, which is a really small distance, which means that with, you know, $500 worth of software and equipment, you can basically recreate the same data that you can do with $100,000 worth of stuff. I like that. I think that's good. So the other thing we did is I'm a big believer in quadcopters. I know the utility of fixed wing drones. I can't afford them, but I think they're great for many, many, many applications. But this was interesting. We compared the EB, the SenseFly EB, with this, with the Phantom on the same area. We used differential GPS for ground control, so it was really, really accurate reference marks. We had targets that we put out that were our reference points. So we were able to do the best possible job we could do in this mapping. I'm pushing buttons here. This is the Phantom 2 Vision. I had to fly manually in terms of flight lines. The Phantom 4 that we use now, I program in flight lines that roughly mimic this. It's kind of what they call a lawnmower type of a pattern. But for this one, I actually had to fly it by hand. But it turned out pretty good. There's the flight lines, and then this is actually the point cloud underneath it, but it also shows where all of the different camera stations are. It's nice and level, nice straight lines. It turned out really good. It was a windy day, but what happened is the quadcopter had so much differential control and between the propellers, and it really wanted to go in a straight line and level, and so it actually did. It wasn't. It kind of compensated for the wind, which was interesting. Here is the point cloud that came from this. Now this is that 3D model. You can rotate it around, you can zoom in and out, and you can actually make discrete measurements on features in there. You can use it to map topography or heights of buildings or whatever you want to. And again, the error on here, in mapping, we refer to the error as something called a root mean squared error, which is kind of like a standard deviation between point measurements, between truth and measured. And so we're down at 20 centimeters. That's about this much in planimetry, and in elevation, it's more like 6 centimeters. So that's there from a 200-foot elevation above it. Pretty good. This is the Great House, they call it. This is the house where Robert E. Lee was born. This is the EB. Now this is, I know this is a cold, it was a windy day. It sounds like the beginning of a scary story. The camera is also oriented vertically, but this is the same, this is actually a programmed flight line on the EB. And so it's windy, and this styrofoam aircraft is flying around like this. The camera is mounted in the belly of the aircraft. It's always aiming down. So if the wind picks up a wing and makes it go up like this, you end up with all these weird angles that you see from the angles on those those little polygons up there, those squares. And that kind of throws off what the aircraft can see. The point cloud, as a result, wasn't near as good as the one from the quadcopter. Again, this is with a $50,000 instrument and a guy who flew up from New Mexico to help us, versus my $1,200 thing that I got from Amazon. This is the terrestrial laser scan. I think it's the most beautiful one, but it's no more accurate, or actually they're all pretty accurate. Here again, we've got a % difference in the roof lengths and different measurements between the terrestrial laser scan and the Phantom, the point cloud generated from that, that's in the order of, at less than a hundredth of a % of error. So what that means is that we can do this, we can take this material or this data home, and we can still work with it, even if we're not in the field. And it only took a morning to do this. So it's pretty great. So really, what's up is that I like the quadcopters more than the fixed wing for the cost, because I can't afford a fixed wing. If I could, I'd probably get one, frankly. But because they cover a lot of area. But the quadcopter allows us to fly right now in an area that's pretty reasonable. I was flying 80-acre sites a couple of weeks ago on one battery, and it was working really, really well with 2-inch pixels on the ground and really super accurate maps. So I just really think that this is, if in my business, I've been working with aerial photography for 30 some odd years, this is a paradigm shift. What drones allow us to do is completely new, completely unique, and completely flexible and completely great. And I'm a fan. That's all.
Thank you, John.
No, okay.
And now we'll turn to Fabio and examine the marketing perspective.
Yes. So, hi everybody. My name is Fabio, and I am the founder of my agency, 100 Digital Creativity. We are mainly focused on VR. That is our core business, but we do also another number of services. We are media producers, basically. So we use almost anything to shoot images and videos. We started to use drones about 5 years ago. We have quite an extensive collection of drones. We have, I think, all the DJIs that have been in the market. And we started to study photogrammetry. I think is a natural evolution of VR, taking buildings, taking places that cannot be accessible, and putting VR. I think is going to be the next one, and that is going to save the cost to build 3D models. Using drones is opening so many doors. That is just a big revolution, a big improvement in the workflow of a photographer, or videographer, or media company. So what we do, we travel and we take pictures. We work mainly with tourist department. The state of Georgia is one of our clients. We are the official VR producer for the city of Atlanta, and we have many more outside Georgia, but I'm going to focus on Georgia. So what we do is to understand their marketing needs, about what they want to create, what is their target audience, and try to put in place a plan to take the images. Drone images are very important. They can be very efficient sometimes. They give us the ability to shoot places from a different point of view. They allow us to show places from an elevated position that can give first of all, an emotion. they can inspire people to travel just because of that image is taken from a drone, and they can see the entire panorama from a view that is not possible to see from the ground. Not only that, we do also, as I said before, we are VR, mainly, we're a VR company. And so what we do is to use drones, helicopters, and other stuff, other toys, to shoot 360 images. And that is not just inspiring because those images are beautiful, or the view is beautiful, but also because they're informative. Marketing has to be inspiring, but has to be also informative. So what we do is also to create constellation of 360 images taken from drones or helicopters, and to link all of them. What was called virtual tours a while ago. Now I don't know what they're called. And to try to explain to potential travelers, tourists, investors, what are the capabilities, what is the workability of the city, what is the proximity from the convention center to the hotels. And so we are building a number of services based on this technology. Drones, we were very excited a while ago, I have to be honest with you. We were very excited, that's why we started 5 years ago. We were one of the first ones to get the hands on a drone. But we got a little bit unhappy by the number of regulations that are not making our job, not making our life easy. The fact that we have to ask authorization basically almost anywhere that we're shooting is making our job more expensive. And of course, clients are not that happy when they have to pay extra. That's why we kind of use drones, but we use also normal helicopters. Just a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to fly over the international airport in Atlanta, and I was shooting 360 images all over the domestic terminal, international terminal, the Porsche Quarter. Well, flying a drone there, I believe it is not suggestible. They don't advise you to do that. With a helicopter, it was just a matter of couple of days, and that's it, that was done. The point also based on my business, is that sometimes we have to shoot an entire city. And it's not very efficient to fly with drones. It's more efficient to fly with helicopters. Even though helicopters, they cannot go that low. So it depends. I mean, drones are opening many more opportunities than before. We are using small, as a painter, as an artist, uses different brushes. We use different drones. We use micro drones for small places, and we go up to the heavy lifter to carry our big cameras, our big rigs, and to stay there a little bit more. Yeah, this is it. I mean, I would love to hear from you if you have questions.
And I'm doing this on the fly. Do we have access to a web browser? Can we throw a web browser up there? Would you?
Sure.
And put up, just do a Google search for 100 digital creativity.
Well, let's go to 360 Bora Bora.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
That's cool.
360, what is it? 360 Bora Bora.
360 Bora Bora. So
There, go there.
We travel quite a lot, and we work with destinations, we work with economic development authorities, and we work also with hotels. This project was done for Le Méridien, and they flew us to Bora Bora in French Polynesia. And we had to
Tough
create
work
a
if you can get it.
24 hours flying.
Oof.
24 hours. I mean, the trip, not just 24 hours by airplane, but the total. The total was 24. 360borabora.com. Yeah, you put double R everywhere. No.
Go to where it says showing results for, pick that. 360
Yeah,
Bora Bora.
click
Yes,
there.
that
Thank
one.
you.
And then, if you give me a mouse, I
This
think.
was the same one. Which video would you like?
It's just 360borabora.com. So if you go to the URL,
I
you
got
type
you.
that one.
Yeah, just click in there. You go.
So that was a project we did for a resort in Bora Bora. We stayed there for a couple of weeks, and we had to prepare all the media. The problem there, the challenge was to show the the size of the resort. And flying a helicopter there was very expensive. You can click and drag and you can look around. Yeah, click and drag. Oh, okay. So those are aerial 360 images. That was a last minute decision, so we flew our small drone. We didn't bring the big guys. That was with a solo, the 3DR solo. So that was those are images from a GoPro that was shooting around. So this is our core business. We do 360 images. We take a bunch of images, as in photogrammetry, and we put the images together to form a bubble. So you can spin around, you can see in every single direction. And then we add more information on top of the images. Another project that we did is 360collegepark.com. That was for the Economic Development Authority of the city of College Park, that is the city of the airport. So they wanted to show all the land that is available for investors or for companies that want to relocate there. They were not happy with maps. Maps are somehow difficult to understand. And so they asked us to do something for them. And that's why we flew the helicopter there. We shot a number of images. We cover 95% of the city properties. And then we highlight all the land that is available. We started to work 4 years ago with them, and I'm not gonna say that it's thanks to us, but in the last 4 years they brought a number of businesses, including the Atlanta Hawks. They are building an arena there. A BMW is building the training facility there. And for a small city like College Park, this is important. So we're helping the community in this way, and we're pretty proud of the results. We have also the city of Atlanta is completely mapped. We shot like, I think, 30 images with a helicopter, and we are updating the images every now and then. And it's the same thing as this one. Of course, with drones, we are limited in the altitude, so that is not for big properties. We cannot go that high, unfortunately. But yeah.
I saw a question somewhere, and while we're going, it was 360 College Park, all
Yes.
run together.
.com.
.com.
Yes.
We'll reconstitute our panel and we'll turn the lights on. How about that?
We have a question.
I have a question. For all
Yes,
the panelists,
two questions.
for all the panelists, if
Cool.
you like,
Yeah.
everybody's kind of mentioned the different perspective you get from drone footage. Does that new perspective translate to your other creative work? Does that make any sense? Does being able to see the way a drone sees help you envision other tasks more creatively?
It allows, it's here I am, I'm a geographer. And
Yeah.
so my task is frequently to go and look at habitats and map habitats. And what the drone allows me to do is access dune fields and marshes and offshore sandbars that I've never been able to get to before. And I think that envisioning that, the drone, it never even occurred to me to be able to do that before a drone was there, because otherwise we would be walking out in the marsh, and now we can keep our shoes on. And flying off a boat gives me really cool reach. So.
And kind of from the preservation world and being in landscape architecture, I've always, like, from the geographer's perspective, I've always used math, I've always used aerial photography to see, like, context and bigger pieces. But when I look at historic maps, and then I geo-reference them or overlay them on current day maps, they sometimes reveal things to me that I wouldn't have put together two and two. So the drones, in some ways, can let me access those places before I actually physically walk to those places to see, is there really anything there? But yeah, a lot of times they do reveal something that I hadn't thought about before, or they just give me a height and a way to look at things in a slightly different way.
I have
from a visual artist point of view or from a photographer point of view, the drones, they help you out delivering the message. And the message can be buy the piece of land because that is a good investment because there is the highway very close by or there is the airport nearby. Or it can be just for inspiration. So you can show a different point of view. I'm in love with those drone images that are shot straight down. You cannot do those images with a pole, or you need to charter an helicopter, but we're talking about, two different costs. So they're opening a new area in the photography.
Those straight down images too reveal patterns in the landscape, from my point of view, patterns in the landscape that you don't see from the ground, which create absolutely lovely screenshot, backgrounds and wall, photographs for the walls and stuff like that. They're just beautiful.
And since we're talking about real images, we're not talking about CG.
Right.
It gives you the feeling the place is real. You feel totally immersed in the place. A few weeks ago, I was in Las Vegas, and I was in Las Vegas like 2 days before the shooting. I have this hobby that I fly helicopters. I mean, I like to take pictures from helicopters. So 2 days before, I chartered a helicopter and I shot images all over Las Vegas at the sunset. And I shot a few images just on top of the Luxor and on top of the Mandalay Bay. Well, I didn't know until the tragedy happened, but you can see everything. I was on top of the Luxor. You can see the concert just in front of you. You can see the Mandalay Bay. You can understand the proximity or the distance in a way that you cannot understand from any map or any CG.
And I like that by looking at it in plan view, the landscape patterns, really, to me, it's the thing that's more interesting is, I mentioned this about archaeology. There could be things directly under the surface that because the vegetation color is just a little different, it reveals something that you wouldn't have noticed by walking across it. You don't kind of put two and two together in that way. You can see it differently.
I think there was a kid, was 14, 15 years old kid, that he found some ancient ruins a few weeks ago, right? There was some articles on the magazines.
Yeah.
And he found this one thanks to Google Earth and Google Maps. That is actually the first example of photogrammetry, because they're building 3D models based on those thousands of images.
Right. There's more questions out there.
Yeah, Fabio, I was trying to understand how the business system works. Do you do all your drone photography in-house, or do you contract locally wherever you're working?
We do everything in-house. We do everything in-house because we try for the best. And we know that when we do the job, we put our passion. When we outsource with other people, we are not sure about their commitment. I personally work about 18 hours a day, so I don't think there is any people that I can outsource my.
I'm willing to do that, yeah.
I think so.
Yes, sir. Yeah, my question is specific to the outside Savannah drone shot. In Cari or Tommy, step us through the exact interfaces you had to go through for certifications, approvals, permits, and consents in what governments?
I'm gonna have you answer because I didn't do the drone photography. I didn't do the actual drone. It was Tommy who did it, so I thought he'd ask.
Yeah, it didn't suffer through very much. I was working on private property, and we were flying under 400 feet in every instance. Usually much lower than that. 200 feet is where I would normally fly on there, but it's on. And we just did it real quick. We didn't do any authorization. It was a couple. Most of the drone flights at Wormslow were a couple years ago.
So your pilot, it was 2 years ago.
I'm sorry?
Your video
At
was 2 years
least,
ago?
at least,
I think it
if
was
not more.
4, I think.
Yeah, something. It was.
It was a while
I
ago.
saw
It is
It was 2015, I think, or was.
14 maybe.
And the video was
14, I think.
was up in the video that you saw was up in Virginia. It was at
The
Stratford.
point I'm trying to come to
Right.
is, in today's environment
Right.
of post-107,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would, I want to learn how much pre-drone flying work is involved in
Mhm.
each of those steps.
Right.
Permitting,
Right.
authorizations, and particularly the
Mhm.
consents.
Mhm.
That's a governor of public use of public drones.
Yeah, so we, in some ways, when we were crafting the project, we purposely were looking for private land ownership because there was lesser steps to go through, shall we say. We also knew at that time that there was this height restriction, and as long as we didn't go above that height restriction and we had the approval of the property owner, that it was fine to do that.
And it wasn't near an airport.
Exactly. Luckily, Stratford Hall is very far away from any kind of airport.
Right. And there were no
Um,
people underneath.
Right. We purposely did it on a weekend day, very early morning, so it wouldn't be a conflict there. But I think the biggest thing is just getting the 107 training, and that kind of whole process takes a certain amount of time and money. But then once you do that, I really think it depends on the piece of property and the thing that you're trying to do. If there are people involved, then that's a whole nother level of stuff. And so I think a lot of the stuff that we were trying to do is be very, very strategic about getting any of those factors that make it take longer, try and get those off the plate, essentially. So doing it on private property and keeping it below elevation were kind of our two things, and then doing it at times that there wouldn't normally be people around.
So it is becoming, if I can pick up from here, it is becoming very, very challenging to fly drones. Not only if you are next to an airport, but now every city wants to put legislation on the drone usage. So the city of Augusta, I think they passed a law or a bill last year to put a restriction on any single drone because they have the golf tournament and they didn't want to allow any drone all year long.
And it's same thing with national
And
parks.
that is- and
No
national
national
parks.
parks. You cannot fly a drone in national park.
But that is nonsense because the airspace now, I mean, until now, because they want to change also those regulations.
Right, they
but
do.
until now, the airspace is public space. What they're doing is that they don't allow you to take off from their land. But if you take off from
Somebody else.
across the street, you can fly.
Right.
But you can fly just until you see the drone.
So one of the
So-
difficulties, at least from like not having access on park sites, I work with a lot of historic park sites, national park sites, is if you think of Fort Pulaski and Hurricane Matthew last fall, or any of the residual stuff this year, to have documentation and how much it would cost to get a plane or a helicopter or this and that, versus having a drone to be able to take these snapshots
Yeah.
at time to monitor what that change is over time and what the impact, how much flooding there is.
So what I usually do if I travel around the states is to contact some pilots, and there is an underground network of pilots. It's legal. It's legal. Otherwise, I'm not gonna say it. What they're doing is something very smart. So if I have to fly my drone in San Diego, let's say, and I don't have the authorization or the waiver, I don't have anything, I don't know anything about that. I contact a pilot that is in San Diego, he's gonna come with me. He's not gonna touch the drone. I'm gonna fly my drone, I'm gonna do all the job, but I'm gonna pay him a fee just to stay next to me. That is legal. If he's there with me, I actually can fly also in restricted airspace.
Really?
Crazy.
Yeah, but if you crash that, then he loses his pilot's license.
Yes, that's why you pay a fee.
And
That's a hell of a feat.
and
That's why you pay.
there's zero enforcement.
Exactly.
There's no enforcement on any of this.
That's what the problem is, exactly.
That's the thing.
Right.
So it's
There is a
voluntarily,
slightly,
yeah.
very tiny, very tiny. They're punishing one out of I don't know many, but every now and then they catch somebody.
This-
Casey Neistat is one of the big ones.
This gentleman in the
There was
blues had his hand up for quite some
Yeah,
time.
Sorry. Matt Burgess from the University of Florida. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and my question, actually, I came here, the University of Georgia Geography Department actually asked me to come here 3 years ago, and we immediately went outside the geography building and flew your Phantom too.
Oh.
Yep.
Right up on Friday, right before game day, as all the boosters were coming in for the game. and one of your students, and this was before 107. Anyway, my question for you is, we had an interesting discussion regarding, there are regulations and rules and things, but the bottom line I wanted to say is 107 will give you a lot of information on questions you're asking
Right.
specifically. So if you take the time to learn the 107 regulations,
there's a
you'll
session
learn
here,
a lot
isn't
about airspace and what you can and can't do, and the legal parts of this. And my main question for you was actually wanting to hear pictures was a LiDAR, and I saw your, obviously your TLS scans and things, but that was ground-based LiDAR showing?
That's
that?
Tommy again, yes.
There was
TLS.
the aerial LiDAR, the ones that she showed at first, that showed the battlements and whatnot.
Yeah,
That was conventional aerial LiDAR that was flown by Chatham County.
Got it.
And so,
Gotcha, okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
We have time for one more. Gentlemen.
Are you thinking about updating your study? In drone years, a lot's happened.
Exactly, exactly.
And a lot has happened in this space.
Mhm.
And I think about the multi-spectrum cameras that are being used now. They can turn on different spectrums of
Right,
light
right.
and evaluate data coming, reflecting off of different
Right.
objects.
I would say if we can find funding, yes, we'll update it, but this is kind of the point of that, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've known about thermal infrared photography since it was developed, and then of course new technologies come along. So, I think it's one of these things where you trust the, I'll call it old-fashioned things, and then as they're all kind of updating with technology at the same time, doing different things, then just try to use the most up-to-date pieces, but that have the same direction that they're going. Yeah, I mean, we really are, one of the things we're doing is we've written a report on this, and the intent is talking about process and methodology. Don't stop with this, but continue to apply new technologies to cultural heritage resources.
Is the study available to me or anybody?
It's going to be on the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training's website, probably in a little bit. I'm going to give it like about 6 months. It takes them a while to get stuff up too.
I can add a little bit to that. You talked about multispectral. We have a 4-band multispectral scanner that does green, red, red edge, and near infrared, which are 3 of the spectral bands that we flew a couple weeks ago down at Sapelo Island. And we flew red, green, blue conventional RGB cameras and the multispectral scanner over the same areas of the marsh, looking at the health of the marsh and the shrubs and whatnot, the beach plants as effect of Hurricane Irma. What happened was that the salt spray came in and just killed a lot of the plants, and some of them, it was really interesting, were dead on the seaward side and still green. They were brown on the seaward side and still green on the landward side. And so we've got the data and we're processing it now, but we're very interested as a remote sensing center. We are very interested in multispectral stuff, and the drone gives us new reach. But the sensors are heavy, and we need Kelsey's drone actually to fly it.
They have that new Flare Duo.
It's coming.
Fascinating discussion. Fascinating. Thank you so much to our panelists.